Do you ever wonder if you've been marked? You survived the spectral sales event. You've seen the haunting results of life consumed by cheap thrills and impulse buys, courtesy of Wally Wimp and the Emporium. Now we move beyond the satire. Tonight, we open the door to the true source of that mundane dread. This is the launchpad for a brand new series, Steel Shadows, Visions of Richard Matheson. Across 10 episodes, we will analyze how Matheson's iconic tales, from robot boxers and steel to the road rage paranoia of Duel, directly mirrored the shadows in his own life. We'll explore the real-life trauma of a World War II veteran, the painful losses that informed his domestic horror, and the Hollywood frustrations that fueled his sharpest satire. The fear we confront tonight is more fundamental. It's the realization that you are merely expected to conform, expected to vanish into the relentless pattern of the ordinary. Prepare to venture into the mind of a master, prepare to see the world as Matheson did, where the uncanny twist is never far from the mundane truth. The curtain is up. The shadows are gathering. SL Tonight, Anthology, begins. Good evening, seekers of the festive fright, and welcome to SL Tonight, where we unwrap the holiday horrors of Richard Matheson, the master who penned 14 novels and 16 Twilight Zone episodes. I'm Felix Lebeski, your host for Steel Shadows, Visions of Richard Matheson, a series celebrating the man whose stories lampoon his career. World War II scars fueling supernatural twists, family joys turning to dread. In the 1950s, Matheson was in California scripting for the Twilight Zone, inspired by his children's Christmas excitement clashing with his war memories of lost innocence. A visit to Santa Claus grew from that contrast, a tale of a dark Santa encounter reflecting his aim to blend Yuletide cheer with horror. Published in 1957 in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, it captures his skill at turning holiday magic into nightmare, drawn from Santa myths and his father's immigrant tales of wonder gone wrong. Behind the scenes, Matheson collaborated with Twilight Zone producers, but this story stayed in pulps, reflecting his frustration with Hollywood's limits on seasonal themes. It's a window into that which drew him to horror, the fear that festive icons hide darkness, a theme that deepened with his son's illness in 1969. Let's pay a visit to this sinister Saint Nick. This is A Visit to Santa Claus. All the way across the dark parking lot, Richard kept whining sulkily. All right, that's enough, Helen said to him when they reached the car. We'll see him on Tuesday. How many times do I have to tell you? I want to see him now, Richard said, twitching with a sob. Ken was reaching for the keys, trying not to drop the packages in his arms. Oh, he said irritably, I'll take him. What do you mean? She asked, shifting her bundles and shivering in the cold wind that raced across the car-packed lot. I mean, I'll take him now, he said, fumbling for the door lock. Now? She asked. It's too late now. Why didn't you take him while we were in the store? There was plenty of time then. So I'll take him now. What's the difference? I want to see Santa Claus. Richard broke in, looking intently at Helen. Mama, I want to see Santa Claus now. Not now, Richard, Helen said, shaking her head. She dumped her bundles on the front seat and straightened her arms with a groan. That's enough, I said, she warned as Richard began whining again. Mommy's too tired to walk all the way back to the store. You don't have to go, Ken told her, throwing his packages in beside hers. I'll take him in myself. He turned on the light. Mama, please. Mama, please. She made herself a place on the seat and sank down with a weary grunt. She noticed the lock of unkempt brown hair dangling across her forehead, the caking dryness of her lipstick. Well, what made you change your mind now? She asked tiredly. I only asked you about 100 times to take him while we were in the store. For God's sakes, what's the difference? He snapped. Do you want to drive back here on Tuesday just to see Santa Claus? No. Well, then, he noticed the wrinkles in her stockings as she pulled her legs around and faced the front of the car. She looked old and sour in the dim light. It gave him an odd sensation in his stomach. Please, Mama? Richard was begging as if Helen were all authority, Ken thought, as if he, the father, had no say at all. Well, that was probably the way it was. Helen stared glumly at the windshield, then reached back and turned off the light. 2 hours of being exposed to frantic Christmas shoppers, nerve-strained salespeople, Richard's constant demands to see Santa Claus, and Ken's irritating refusals to take him had jaded her. And what am I supposed to do while you're gone? She asked. It'll only be a few minutes, for God's sakes, Ken answered. He'd been on hooks all night, either remote and uncommunicative or snapping nervously at her and Richard. Oh, go ahead, she said, arranging the coat over her legs, and please hurry. Santa Claus! Santa Claus! Richard shouted, tugging joyously at his father's top coat. All right, Ken flared. Stop pulling at me, for God's sake. Joy to the world, the Lord has come, Helen said, her sigh of one of disgust. Yeah, sure, Ken said bitterly, grabbing at Richard's hand. Come on. Helen pulled the car door shut, and Ken noticed she didn't push down the button to lock it. She might, though, after they'd gone. The keys! The thought exploded suddenly, and he drove his hand into his top coat pocket, his palsied fingers tightening over their cold note. A dry swallow moved his throat, and he sucked in cold air shakily, heartbeat thudding like a fist inside his chest. Take it easy, he told himself. Just take it easy. He knew enough not to look back. It'd be like taking one more look at a funeral. He stared up deliberately at the glittering neon wreath on the department store roof. He could barely feel Richard's hand on his other hand clutched at the keys in his pocket. He wouldn't look back. Ken! His body clamped in a spasmodic start as her voice rang out thinly in the huge lot. Automatically, he turned and saw her standing by the Ford looking at him. Leave the keys, she called. I'll drive around to the front of the store so you don't have to walk all the way back here. He stared blankly at her, feeling the sudden cramped tightness of his stomach muscles. That's... He cleared his throat almost furiously. It's not that far, he called back. He turned away before she could answer, noticing how Richard glanced at him. His heartbeat was like a club swung against the wall of his chest. Mama's calling, Richard said. You want to see Santa Claus or not? Ken demanded sharply. Yes? Then shut up. He swallowed again painfully and lengthened his stride. Why did that have to happen? A shudder ran down his back. He looked up at the neon wreath again, but he could still see Helen standing by the car in her green corduroy coat, one arm raised a little, her eyes on him. He could still hear her voice. So you don't have to walk all the way back here, sounding thin and plaintive over the buffering night wind. He felt that wind chilling his cheeks now as he and Richard's shoes made a crisp, uneven sound on the gravel-strewn asphalt. 70 yards, maybe it was 70 yards to the store. Was that the sound of their car door slamming shut? She was probably angry. If she pushed down the button, it'd be harder to. The man in the dark, sagging brimmed hat stood at the end of the aisle. Ken pretended not to see him, but the air seemed rarefied suddenly, as though he were beyond atmosphere, trudging in an icy darkness that was near vacuum. It was the constriction around his heart that made him feel that way, the apparent inability of his lungs to hold in breath. Does Santa Claus love me? Richard asked. Ken's chest labored with forced breath. Yes, yes, he said. He does. The man just stood there staring up at the sky, both hands deep in the pockets of his old checked overcoat, as if he were waiting for his wife to come out of the department store. But he wasn't. Ken's finger grew rigid on the keys. His legs felt like heavy wood carrying him closer to the man. I won't do it, he thought suddenly. He would walk right by the man, take Richard to see Santa Claus, return the car, go home, forget about it. He felt incapable and without strength. Helen alone in the Ford, sitting beside their Christmas packages, waiting for her husband and son to return. The thought sent strange electric pricklings through his body. I just won't do it. He heard the words as if someone was speaking them in his mind. I just won't. His hand was growing cold and numb on the keys as, unconscious of it, he cut off the flow of blood to his fingers. He had to do it. It was the only way. He wasn't going to return the nerve-knotting frustration that was his present. The dreary expanse that was his future. Interior rages were poisoning him. For his own health, it had to be done, for what was left of his life. They reached the end of the aisle and walked past the man. Richard cried, Daddy, you dropped the keys. Come on, he pulled Richard's hand, forcing himself not to look back over his shoulder. But you did, Daddy. I said... Ken's voice broke off abruptly as Richard pulled away from him and ran to where the ring of keys lay on the asphalt. He stared with helpless eyes at the man who hadn't budged from his place. The man appeared to shrug, but Ken couldn't see what his expression was beneath the wide hat brim. Richard came running back with the keys. Here, Daddy. Ken slid them into his top coat pocket with shaking fingers, a sick dismay twisting his insides. It won't work, he thought. feeling both an agony of disappointment and agony of wrenching guilt. Say thank you, Richard said, taking his father's hands again. Ken stood motionless in indecision, still holding onto the keys in his pocket. Empathic muscle tension pulled him towards the man, but he knew he couldn't go to him, Richard would say. Let's go, Daddy, Richard urged. Ken turned away quickly, his face a painted mask as he started for the store. He felt dizzy, without feeling. It's over, he thought in bitter fury. Over. Say thank you, Daddy. Will you? The sound of his voice startled him, and he trapped the hysterical surge of words behind pressed, trembling lips. Richard was silent. He glanced cautiously at his taunt-faced father. They were halfway to the store entrance when the man in the checked overcoat brushed past Ken. Excuse it, muttered the man, apparently by accident. His arm brushed roughly against the pocket where the keys were, indicating that he wanted and was ready to receive them. Then the man was past them, walking in jerky strides towards the store. Ken watched him go, feeling as if his head were being compressed between two hands. The palms contoured to his skull. It's not over, he thought. He didn't even know whether he was glad it wasn't. He saw the man stop and turn before one of the glass doors that flanked the revolving door. Now, he told himself, it has to be now. He took out the keys again. I want to go that way, Daddy. Richard was tugging him towards the revolving door which spun shoppers into the crowded den or out into the silent chill of night. It's too crowded, he heard himself say, but it was someone else speaking. It's my future, he kept thinking. My future. It's not crowded, Daddy. He didn't argue. He jerked Richard towards the side door, and as he pulled the door open with the keys in his hand, he felt them grab from his fingers. Then in a second, he and Richard were in the noisome brightness of the store, and it was done. He didn't look over his shoulder, but he knew that the man was walking back in the dark lot now, back towards the aisle where the Ford was parked. For one horrible instant, he felt as if he were going to make an outcry. A great sickness rushed up through his body, and he almost yelled and dashed back into the night after the man. No, I've changed my mind. I don't want it done. In that instant, everything he hated about Helen and his life with her seemed to vanish, and all he could remember was that she was going to drive the car to the front of the store so he and Richard wouldn't have to walk back across the cold, wind-swept lot. But then Richard had pulled him into the warmth and noise and milling press of shoppers, and he was walking along dizzily, moving deeper into the store. Chimes were playing from the second floor balcony. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. She'd said that. He felt dizzy and ill. Sweat began trickling across his forehead. He couldn't go back now. He stopped in the middle of the floor and leaned against a pillar, his legs feeling as if they'd turned to water. Too late, he thought. Too late. There's nothing he could do now. I want to see Santa Claus, Daddy. Breath faltered through his parted lips. Yes, he said, nodding feebly. All right. He tried to move along without thinking, but found that impossible. His thoughts were flashing visual images. The man walking down the white aisle toward the Ford. The man checking the miniature license plate on the keyring to make sure he got the right car. The man's face as it had been the night in the Main Street bar, thin, pale, corrupted. A whimper started in Ken's throat, but he cut it off. Helen, he thought and said with anguish. This way to Santa's magic house. He started numbly towards the down escalator, Richard skipping and wrangling beside him, whispering in breathless excitement. Santa Claus, Santa Claus. What would Richard feel when his mother was... All right, he forced a strengthening rage to himself. If he had to think, he'd think about the future, not this. He hadn't planned all this just to collapse into useless infirmity when it came about. There was reason behind the act. It wasn't just a thoughtless viciousness. They stepped onto the escalator. Richard's hand was tight in his, but he hardly felt it. South America and Rita. He thought about that. $25,000 insurance money. The girl he wanted at college and never stopped wanting. A future without the debasing struggle to stay one jump ahead of creditors. Freedom, simple pleasures in a relationship that wouldn't be eroded away by the abrasion of petty existence. The uphill escalator angled past them, and Ken glanced at the shoppers' faces. Tired, irritable, happy, blank. It came upon a midnight clear. The chimes began to play. He stared straight ahead, thinking about Rita and South America. Thinking about that made everything a lot easier. Now the chimes faded and were swallowed in a raucous glee club blaring of jingle bells. Richard began skipping excitedly as they stepped off the escalator, and Ken suddenly found himself thinking about Helen again. Jingle all the way. There he is, Richard cried, pulling frantically. There! All right, Ken muttered under his breath as they moved towards the line that shuffled towards Santa's magic house. Had it happened yet? That contracting the stomach muscle again. Was the man in the car? Was Helen unconscious and back? Was the man driving across the lot towards the dark side streets where he'd... Don't worry. The man's last words to him were like a flame searing his mind. Don't worry, I'll make it look good. Look good. Look good. Look good. Look good. The words thumped on in his thoughts as he and Richard moved slowly towards the house of Santa Claus. 100 down, 900 to follow, the price of one medium-sized wife. Kim shut his eyes suddenly and felt himself shivering as if it were cold in the store instead of unbearably stuffy. His head ached, drops of sweat trickled down from his armpits, feeling like insects on his flesh. It's too late, he thought, realizing that part of the tension he'd felt since entering the store had been the struggle with his impulse to rush back to the car to stop the man. But, as you say, he heard a quiet voice whispering in his mind. It's too late. What shall I tell Santa, Daddy? Richard asked. Kenny looked down bleakly at his 5-year-old son and thought he'd be better off with Helen's mother, a lot better off. I can't. What shall I, Daddy? He tried to smile, and for a moment he even managed to visualize himself as a gallant man bearing up under a terrible burden that fate had put on his shoulders. Tell him what you want for Christmas. Tell him you've been a good boy and what you want for Christmas. That's all. But how? Vision had already faded. He knew exactly what he was and what he'd done. How should I know? He snapped angrily. Look, if you don't want to see him, you don't have to. The man in front of them turned and shook his head at Ken with a wry smile that seemed to say, I know what you're going through, buddy. Ken's smile in return was little more than a slight, mirthless twitching of the lips. Oh, God, I gotta get out of here, he thought miserably. How can I stand here while breath labored in his lungs? It was what he had to do. It was the plan, and it had to be carried out. He wasn't going to spoil it now with stupid histrionics. If only he could be with Rita, though, in her apartment beside her. But it was impossible. He'd settle for a drink, a stiff one, anything to break the tension. They pushed open the white gate and it set off a record of man's booming laughter. Ken jumped and looked around. The laughter sounded insane to him. He tried not to listen, but it surrounded him, dinning in his ears. Then the gate closed behind them and the laughter stopped. He heard a thin voice piping over the PA system. I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'll make it look good. Ken released Richard. He rubbed his damp palm against his coat. Richard tried to take his hand again, but Ken jerked his hand away so savagely that Richard looked frightened and puzzled. No, no, I can't act this way. Ken heard the instructions in his mind. Richard might be asked questions. Questions like, how did your daddy act when you were in the store together? He took Richard's hand and managed to force a smile. Almost there, he said. The calmness of his voice shocked him. I tell you, I don't know how I lost the keys. I had them in my pocket when I went in the store. I'm sure of it. That's all I know. Are you trying to imply that? No. All wrong. No matter what they intimidated, he must never let them know he understood. Shocked, dazed, hardly capable of coherence. That's the way he'd have to be. A man who had taken his son to see Santa Claus had been told the next day that they'd found his wife still in the car. I'll make it look. Why couldn't he forget that? Santa Claus was sitting in a high-backed chair on the porch of the magic house. Magic because it changed color every 15 seconds. He was a fat, middle-aged man with a chuckling voice who had held children on his lap a few moments, spoke the formula words, then put the children down, one peppermint stick Richard, patted them on the rear, and said goodbye and Merry Christmas. When Richard came on the porch, Santa Claus picked him up and set him down on a broad, red-knickered lap. Ken stood on the bottom step, feeling dizzy in the warmth of the store, staring dull-eyed at the red, rouged face, the dreadfully false whispers. Well, Sonny, said Santa Claus, have you been a good boy this year? Richard tried to answer, but speech stuck in his throat. Ken saw him nod, flushing nervously. He'll be better off with Helen's mother. I can't do right by him. His eyes strained to focus on the red, whiskered face. What? I say this boy has been good has this boy been good this year? Oh, yes, very good. Well, old Santa is glad to hear that. Very glad. And what would you like for Christmas, Sonny? Ken stood there motionless, sweat soaking in his shirt while the faint voice of his son droned on endlessly, itemizing the toys he wanted. The fort seemed to waver before his eyes. I'm sick, he thought. I gotta get out of here and get some fresh air. Helen, I'm sorry. I just couldn't do it any other way, don't you see? Then Richard came down the steps with his peppermint stick, and they started towards the escalator. Santa said, I'll get everything I asked, Richard told him. Ken nodded jerkily, reached into his suit coat pocket for a handkerchief. Maybe people would think it was perspiration was wiping from his cheeks. Maybe they'd think he was overcome with emotion because it was Christmas. He loved Christmas, and that's why there were tears in his face. I'm going to go tell Mama, Richard said. Yes, his voice was barely audible. We'll go out and walk back to where the car was parked. We'll look around a while, and then I'll call the police. Yes, I said. What, Daddy? He shook his head. Nothing. The escalator lifted them towards the main floor. The Glee Club started singing Jingle Bells again. Ken stood behind Richard and stared down at his blonde hair. This is the part that counts most, he told himself. What went before was just time consumption. He'd have to act surprised on the phone, irritated. A little concerned, maybe, but not too much. Man wouldn't panic under such circumstances. Normally a man wouldn't conceive that his wife's disappearance meant behind them, the recorded laughter boomed faintly over the Glee Club singing. He tried to ease his mind as if he were a blackboard, but words kept forming there. Be a little concerned, a little irritated. We're not implying anything, Mr. Burns. And abruptly, they were at him again. We were just saying that 20,000 is a lot of insurance. Look, his face tightened as he glared back at them. It's something we believed in, see? I'm insured 25,000 too, you know. You forget that. It was his biggest point. The insurance had been in effect less than a year, but at least they were both equally insured. He scuffed his shoe toe at the top of the escalator and found himself back in the store again, walking beside his son towards the doors which would involve them into the night. A thin current of air fluttered his trouser cuffs. He felt the chill on his ankles. We'll take a look around, and then I'll... It came over him. He didn't know how, but suddenly he couldn't leave the store. Suddenly he was standing in front of a counter, staring down intently at handkerchiefs and ties. He felt Richard's eyes on him, and he was admonishing himself. I mustn't look upset. I didn't plan all this just to break down at the last minute. Rita, South America, money. It was good to think about the future. He'd known that all along, yet he'd allowed himself to forget. The future was what was important. Rita and he together in South America. There, that was better. He took in a long, faltering breath of warm air, hands in his coat pocket, and nodded. Come on, he said, and this time he was grimly pleased at the calmness of his voice. Let's go. As he took Richard's hand, the closing gong sounded above the organ playing Silent Night, Holy Night. Perfect timing, he told himself. 9 p.m. Monday night. We'll go out to where the Ford was parked, then we'll call the police. But should he call the police? A momentary touch of panic startled him. Wouldn't he normally think that maybe Helen had gotten angry and... I thought she'd gotten angry and driven home without us. No, she'd never done anything like it before. Anyway, we went home by my bus, my son and I, but my wife wasn't there. And I don't know where she is. Yes, I checked at her mother's house. No, that's her only relative in the city. They pushed through the doorway now, and were back outside. Ken looked straight across the car-filled lot as they moved away from the store. He couldn't feel the grip of Richard's hands in his. All he could feel was his heartbeat leaping like something imprisoned at the wall of his chest. Well, I wonder where her mother went, he imagined himself saying to Richard where they'd reached the place where the Ford had been parked. Where's Mama? Would be Richard's reply. Then there'd be the wait, calling the police finally. No, she's never done anything like this. His mind ticked on, unbidden. It assumed she was angry and had gone home, but when my son and I got home, she wasn't there. For a moment he thought he had died, and his heart had ceased to beat. He felt as he'd been turned to stone. The wind blew coldly in his stricken face. Come on, Daddy, Richard said, tugging at him. He didn't move. He stood looking at the car, Helen sitting in it. I'm cold, Daddy. He found himself walking, moving with a dazed, somnambulistic tread. Intelligence would not return to him. He could only stare at the car and at Helen and suffer a twisting sickness in his stomach. His head felt light and fragile as if it were about to float off. Only the impact of his footsteps that jarred consciousness through him held the parts of his body together. His eyes were set unmovingly on the car. He knew a great warm surge of relief. Helen was looking at him. We pulled open the door. It's about time you got back, she said. He couldn't speak, trembling as he pushed the seat forward and Richard clambered into the back. Come on, let's get out of here, Helen said. Ken slid his hand into his coat pocket and with the act remembered. Well, said, I can't find the keys. He patted feebly at his pockets. Had them with me when... Oh, no. Lilt in her voice was weariness and disgust. Ken swallowed. Well, where are they? Helen asked. I swear if your head weren't fastened to your shoulders. I don't know, he said. I must have dropped them somewhere. Well, go pick them up then, she snapped. Yes, he said, yes. He pushed the door out almost desperately and stood in the cold air. I'll be right back, he said. She didn't answer, but he could feel her hostility. He shut the door and moved away from the car, his face beginning to harden. That bastard taking his money, and he suddenly imagined himself trying to explain the lack of $100 in the checking account. She never believed that it had simply vanished. She'd investigate, find out about the cast he'd gotten, probe, demand. Oh, God, he thought. I'm done. I'm done. He looked off, his eyes unseeing, fixed on the huge neon wreath on the roof of the store. In the middle of it, tall white letters were blinking off and on. He focused on them suddenly. Merry Christmas, darkness. Merry Christmas, darkness. Merry Christmas, darkness. That was A Visit to Santa Claus, a story that unwraps Richard Matheson's take on Hollywood holiday dread. At 31, Matheson was in Los Angeles, balancing family with Twilight Zone scripting, inspired by his kids' Santa visits that sparked thoughts of innocence corrupted. It lampoons his career, War's loss of wonder extended to myths, his pulp roots maturing into critiques of childhood illusions. Writing this in 1957, he drew from Kris Kringle legends and his brother's early death, aiming to show his tear hides fear. Behind the scenes, Matheson submitted to FNSF, reflecting his frustration in Hollywood's sanitized holiday tales. It's a window on what drew him to horror, the fear that icons like Santa could turn malevolent, a theme that deepens with the civil rights struggles in the 1960s. Richard Matheson, visionary behind A Visit to Santa Claus, turned holiday joy into a nightmare of entrapment. The story asks what lurks behind the cheer and who really delivers the gifts. Join us next time for Steel Shadows Visions of Richard Matheson on SL Tonight as we keep unearthing his enigmas. Like, subscribe, and good night.